everything just woke up. And I suddenly knew at that point in time that there was more to life than what had been going on in my head.
Welcome back to Dharma Talk, episode 006. This episode, the conversation was recorded while I was in New York, and my guest was in Connecticut, his home. But now I'm in Austin, and by the time the episode airs and goes live on iTunes, and you're listening to it, I will be in California. And who knows where you are? Sometimes I think that yoga makes you realize that time and space are somewhat illusory, but this podcast is really taking that to a whole new level. So a little bit about the guest. Today I interview Matt Giordano. And Matt is a new friend of mine that I met in Sweden during a yoga conference. Now that's a bit more of a special occasion for me, but for Matt, that is truly par for the course. Matt is a traveling yoga teacher in the sense that he has made his career moving around the world, teaching workshops at different studios in different countries all the time. So much so that he's made his home his break. So when he comes back to Connecticut, to his house, he doesn't teach at a studio. He doesn't have a teaching home base. He's very much committed to spreading his message throughout the world. And he's also got the online presence. He's got quite a following on Instagram and YouTube. We'll have links to those in the show notes. But I think you'll be very interested to hear what he has to say. In this conversation, we talk about this idea of micro movements and reorganizing asana practice to be around peak actions versus peak postures, which is the more standard way of arranging classes. We also talk about being in a world touring rock band before he was a yoga teacher, and this process of differentiating passion from Dharma. We talk about soulmates, plural, and trusting the guidance of other people and outside forces in your life. And we also talk about making a difficult decision to walk away from success as you know it in order to grow and align with your purpose. Now, before we get into the interview, just got a couple announcements. I think you're going to love it, so stay tuned. Hey yogis, I just wanted to let you know that I've recently started recording some of the masterclasses and workshops that I'm teaching around the country and around the globe. And I'm putting them online on my website. And they're totally free for you to access. Now, I know it's not the same experience as coming and taking class in person, but I know that's not possible for everyone. So I wanted to make this an option available no matter where you are. Now, all you have to do to get access to my audio library is head on over to henrywins.com/practice. That's henrywins.com/practice. And there'll be a little box where you can drop your name and email address to get access to that page. So go check that out. I appreciate you taking a look, and please enjoy. California yogis, I'm coming your way. On April 22nd, my wife Veronica Lambo and I will be teaching a joint workshop at AcroYoga, the Costa Mesa location, and it's called Scorpion Hour, Invert Your Backbend. The scorpions are my absolute favorite family of poses because they combine all the therapeutic benefit of back bending with inversions. So this is going to be a very fun workshop. You don't need to be a pro. You don't need to already have a handstand or anything like that. Come check it out. The event details are at henrywins.com/events. What's your purpose? What's your vision? What mark will you leave on this planet long after you're gone? I'm Henry Winslow, and you're listening to Dharma Talk, the only podcast where I interview inspirational yogis on how they're changing the world in their own unique ways. Whether you're still searching for your purpose or already walking the path, I hope these stories get you excited to live your Dharma. Hello, Dharma Talk community. Welcome back to another episode. Today, I've got a great new guest for you. His name's Matt Giordano. Originally from Seacliff, Long Island, Matt spent 7 years developing his teaching in Manhattan. He now travels internationally to teach his signature technique-based style of yoga, educating yoga students on how to use their body in a profound and life-changing way. His study of biomechanics and integrative mind-body techniques informs his teaching, which draws from traditions in yoga, martial arts, acrobatics, AcroYoga, and Thai massage. Thanks for coming on the show, Matt. So excited to have you. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Sweet. Let's roll with it. I always ask my guests the same first question, so we're just going to dive right in. What does the word Dharma mean to you? And what is your Dharma as you understand it today?
Yeah, it's a brilliant question. Dharma to me is living life with purpose or living life on purpose. And it's a feeling of alignment with nature. It's a feeling that life is kind of carrying you as you are also carrying it. So there's a relationship that happens. It's not a one-sided thing. But I would say, I would give the analogy that when you're swimming, let's say in a river, you could either swim upstream, you could swim across stream, or you can swim downstream. And when you're searching for your Dharma, it can feel like you're swimming upstream the entire time. And when you're kind of starting to align with it, it feels more like you're swimming across the stream. And then when you're really aligned with it, you're just flowing with the stream. And it takes effort still to stay in alignment, meaning you've got to steer around the rocks, and you've got to make sure that you're flowing in that direction. But nonetheless, as you are in the flow, there's a connection to the natural rhythm of the stream itself. And maybe that sounds vague, but basically it's easier in a way because your efforts are being matched by the rhythm and flow of nature. And most people know when they're in alignment with their actions are leading towards something more powerful than, say, something that's perhaps just self-serving. And let's be clear, I don't, for Dharma, when you're living your Dharma, you're still serving yourself. You're just also serving everybody else in the world. And that's not to say, everybody's Dharma can be completely different. It doesn't mean you have to be teaching yoga or meditation or something mind-body oriented. You can be living your Dharma by being an auto mechanic. It's more than a spiritual path or doings. It's about how you do something, why you're doing something, and fitting that role with nature. Nature needs all parts in order for it to work. It doesn't value the sun over the moon or the ground over the earth, over air, and so on. It's a totality. So all of us kind of have a purpose inside of us that we are drawn to, and some of us are fearful of it, fearful that we can't perhaps be enough to live it. And some of us are unsure how to live it, even though we might know what it is. And some people find the courage inside themselves to take the actions to move toward their purpose, to move towards living their Dharma. And as a result, there's a feeling that is returned or reciprocated that you're fulfilled. And so to me, you're living your Dharma when you feel fulfilled, when you feel like you're living with purpose, living on purpose. What is my Dharma specifically? I would say my Dharma right now is teaching teachers. So offering a space for teachers to grow their ability to share with others. And so I'm doing that in a number of ways. I'm doing that through workshops, teaching internationally, which is providing a space for yoga teachers and yoga students to learn about their body. And I think I should just mention that one of the things that is probably feels like my calling is to help people become aware of their body on deeper levels, not just knowing yoga as like warrior 2, warrior 1, and the basic shapes, but to actually help people tap into the sensations of their body and what it feels like to, let's say, move their muscles or engage their muscles so that they can move their bones inside their joints and to feel their body on a sensational level that is spiritual. And
Awesome. I love that. I mean, there's so much to pick apart from what you just said, but the first thing that really jumped out at me is your beautiful analogy for Dharma swimming in the current of water. And I just want to kind of pick your thoughts on that, specifically around finding the current, because the way that you've described it, it seems as though finding your Dharma provides like a relief and an ease after being in the tumultuous waters for some time. And there's almost a magnetism of this calling pulling you in that direction. And even if it's hard to get there, once you do arrive, it's much easier. Do you think that's a fair assessment of what you said?
yeah, I think that's a great assessment and probably a clearer way of saying it.
Well, I would love to talk to you soon about how you got to that point where you found the natural flow of the water or the Dharma, so to speak. But first, I want to talk to you about your personal yoga practice, because you started to talk a little bit about the difference between making the shapes, doing the warrior one, doing the warrior two, and having a better understanding or better sensation of what's happening in your body. So, Matt, what does your personal yoga practice look like these days? And how would you say it's supported you on your path to discovering your Dharma?
Yeah, okay. So my personal yoga practice on the outside doesn't look like much. It looks because it quite often happens on an airplane where I'm specifically using a TheraBand to activate a certain muscle group in my, say my forearm, or even training my pinky finger to engage in a certain way in response to a certain shape. So I call it like micro movements. I'm really focused on the specificity of what I'm capable of in my body, rather than the big general kind of like. I don't want to say I'm not focused on the big general movements of my body, because I am. I would just say that I've spent many years focusing on the bigger movements. So in more recent years, last I'd say 3 to 5 years, it's been really specific. And how I decide what I'm working on and trying to understand is based on a conversation that I've been having with my body since the beginning of practicing yoga. And so it's listening, like where perhaps I might feel weaker and strengthening those areas, perhaps what areas seem to overreact to my day, and then allowing those places to relax and bring flexibility into the places that tend to be tense and tight. So it's a conversation that I'm having, and it doesn't exist on four corners of the yoga mat and within an hour and 15 or an hour and a half. It could exist in 5 minutes. It could exist throughout the entire day. So like when I have an action, let me put it this way. The way I teach yoga is through something I call the peak action. I use this term when teaching my students. So I have an educational system called Chromatic Yoga. And in Chromatic Yoga, we take apart teaching in what I call structures. And that's just basically a way of following different aspects of how to present material to students. And so for me, one of the structures that we use is a peak action. And that means to, rather than a peak pose, which many teachers teach to, is like, okay, so we have full wheel Urdhva as our peak posture. And if we have that, then we, lead up with a bunch of shapes that kind of look that way. I teach to a peak action, which is like an engagement of your muscles to create a certain sensation in the body. For example, if you squeeze your shins into a block, you'll feel the muscles of your inner thighs. These are called your adductor muscles. I might do that in, say, plank pose, chair pose, and then crow pose, and continuously increase the challenge of the posture, but the action is remaining the same. And so by the end of the workshop, you're seeing how an action or an engagement of muscles in your body leads to certain postures or unlocking certain postures for you. Now, I do that for myself throughout the day, but my peak posture might not happen within one day. So, like, for example, one of the poses that I've been working on for the past 8 years of my life is one-armed handstand. And I am proud to say that I am not there yet.
Because what would you do if you already were?
Yeah, because then I'd have to think of something else to focus on. But there was so much within that posture, that for me brings out my weaknesses. And so throughout my day, I'm studying what are the peak actions that are going to unlock this posture for me. And to be fair, most days I'm not thinking of one-armed handstand anymore, but it was the inspiration that started my curiosity about certain parts of my body and how they interact with each other. So, one of the things, as I sort of made a point about earlier, was my wrist. Like, I noticed that my left wrist tends to be weaker than my right. And as a result, I feel a lot more comfortable attempting a one-armed handstand on my right than my left. Now that's a small result, but the bigger result is, like, I realize how much more dominant I am in my right than my left, which is, I think, a thing that most people understand about themselves. But for me, as a curious human being and as a being of nature, I don't just stop there and say, like, oh, I'm right-handed and that's it. But I'm curious as to understand how my brain interacts with the muscles on my right side versus my left side, because there's a lot more to it than just, oh, I'm right-handed. It's like a firing pattern of brain to body that tells these muscles to engage when this happens. And one of the most curious things for me is to try to develop the skill of, I live in this body, this specific body, one time, and I might as well master my awareness of it. And it doesn't mean that I'll ever get there, but I might as well move towards it. So my thing is, like, this is a form of gratitude and appreciation by studying how my pinky engages in, a one-armed handstand. It's a form of saying, not that you have to do one-armed handstand to be grateful, but the idea is for me to connect to each bone in my body and each muscle and give it time, give it my attention, give it my time, give it my care, and see if I can support it in its growth and support myself in understanding it more.
I am so right there with you. I mean, about a lot of the things that you just said. I mean, as far as working toward a peak action versus the peak pose, I think that's a smart way to go about it, certainly, because, the shape of a posture doesn't necessarily tell you all too much about what's going on to make it happen. So just because there's a circle or a triangle in this pose and this pose doesn't mean that they're too connected. I think it's a much more effective way to look at the parts of the body that you're using, or, more to your point, which, neuron synapses are firing to make it happen. But also, your left and right side thing, that has been so much of what I'm doing in my personal practice lately. Is like finding out the little subtlest pieces where there are imbalances between left and right. And, one of them for me, which is just like kind of a funny example, is in reverse prayer. If I'm doing like a pyramid fold with my hands behind my back, the right index finger knuckle doesn't want to push in as much as the left index finger knuckle. And, the more that you practice, the more I think you get interested in these tiniest little, from an outside perspective, insignificant subtleties. But that's where it gets fun and interesting. And I think you have to stay curious about that sort of thing, to be grateful, like you said, and also because that's where it gets more complex and interesting.
Yeah, I would exactly. I'm glad you can. I can see, as you're saying it and thinking about how I'm saying it. I'm like, okay, if I'm an outside person listening to this conversation, it's like, okay, if you're not a specific type of person, this might sound like super mundane and weird and and kind of like
who cares?
Yeah, who cares? And I totally understand that, and I don't think, like, the question was about what my practice looks like. So I'm just sharing it not from the perspective of saying this is the right way or the wrong way, or, everyone in order to live their Dharma has to has to practice in the way. But I could see, between you and I, that's part of our Dharma, or part of our, what really enthuses us and keeps us curious. And I think probably what makes us feel appreciative of this physical form that we're living in. So yeah, for those that are listening, it's not, it's not necessarily the approach you have to go. It's just an approach that is in response to what we truly feel is important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's, I think, part of what's inherently powerful about personal dharmas is that everybody's got their own, and certain people are going to resonate with it and some are not, but everybody needs service, you and I included. So to find someone who's doing something that works for you is a blessing.
Yeah,
Okay.
totally.
So I wanted to go back to that metaphor that you gave about swimming upstream and finding that current. Can you take us back to an exact moment or episode in your life where you found that the Dharma really clicked and you just fell into the flow? So when did you realize that this was your personal duty or path?
Well, I can say that the very first moments that I realized this was my path was, I was previously in a band, and I was on tour quite a bit in a van with a bunch of dudes, and we were, sitting in traffic, then, playing on stages to hundreds and thousands of people, and like all this big sound, and the energy was rising, and then we felt really alone, and it was like this up and down, this crazy, a tumultuous experience. And
Okay. That's amazing.
I
Hold on,
thought
before you go on, what was the name of the band?
it was called Stealing Jane.
Okay, we're gonna have to link up
That's
to that in the
fine.
show notes so people can check out your past
Yeah,
life. Okay, go on.
totally.
Go on.
There's plenty on the internet about that. But so for me, the experience I thought was kind of, uh, I thought it was my purpose. I thought that's where my life was meant to go. And a lot of people talk about, I think, sorry, I'm just going to tangent for a second.
By all
A
means.
lot of, yeah, a lot of people, I think, have this vision that the people that are successful, just like popped into success with what they're doing. And if you really go deep into people's lives, you'll realize that the ones that are successful with what they're doing failed like a whole bunch of times in many areas. So my band was an 8-year failure, I would say, in the best way possible. It was the struggle of being completely broke for a very, very long period of time, and eating like crap the entire time, and having the biggest emotional roller coaster that sent me so far out of balance. I was not becoming a kind person. I was not feeling good about myself, completely insecure, and so on and so forth. So there was, but there was this notion that, well, I'm living my passion, so it must be right. But the reality was, as I started to step a little bit away from it, and I was stepping away from it because I was craving balance. I was craving, well, that's not necessarily true. Hold on one second. The reason I started stepping away from it was because my friends, my band members, all called me out on my personality and who I was becoming, and saying that they didn't really want to be around me anymore. And as a result, I was either out of the band or I had to make a change. And so I was actually forced, sort of in a way, to start looking at myself and asking myself the questions of like, well, who am I? What am I doing? Why am I acting this way? How come I'm not being a kind human being, basically? So that began a process of observing who I was. And I started to see this strong desire to argue and to be right. So there's like a righteousness, and that began my work to look at where that was coming from. And to the way I went about it, which was kind of violent, was to look at myself and say like, okay, you have this really strong opinion and you think you're right. So how about, and also I valued my argumentative skills. So I'd say, well, why don't you argue against yourself before you open your mouth? So I started to make arguments for the other side without saying anything. And then I would come to the conclusion that I was right on both ends. So yeah, I was feeding my righteousness while becoming more open, which was a very fascinating time. Um, but as a result, I became less argumentative, and what the benefit of that was actually was to see myself and to see my thoughts and to see that I was not my opinion, and that I was not that feeling of fire inside of me. I was not that emotion of like angst and anger. It was just that I was experiencing that at the time. So this process of getting to know myself led me to be more curious. And within a year's time, my band members totally forgot about the sit down that they had with me.
The
And
ultimatum.
yeah, exactly. And it was I really worked hard to relax my responses and to not attack other people, because it can get really cutthroat when you're in a band and you're sitting in traffic. The last thing you ate was like a McDonald's burger and your stomach is in pain, and and you've got a time frame that you got to get to the next place, and you were just in front of thousands of people on stage, and then the next show you go to, there's 3 people watching you, and it's a crazy emotional experience, and it throws you through massive loops.
Sure.
And so, like for me, I was really while it was one of the most scary times of my life when they sat me down, it became the biggest turning point of my life towards pointing me in the direction of what I would consider to be my Dharma. So where did that go from there? I became curious about meditation. And I started reading books. One of the books I read early on was called Effortless Mastery. It's a music book. So if anyone's a yogi or a meditator and a musician, that's the book to read, because it talks about the ego as a musician, and it gives meditation exercises and so on, and it gives an approach to learning music from a clear perspective versus the like trying to define myself perspective. I won't get too deep into that, but that book suggested meditation, and that's where I started trying to meditate. And through that meditation process, I struggled like crazy. So in that struggle, the fact that I was just sitting started to awaken something deeper inside of me. And I guess this is we're about to get real deep, but
Let's do it. We're going in.
it, there's a massive turning point in my struggles of meditation and in this seeing myself time, where I was at a producer who just passed away. We were at his memorial service, and for me, this is a guy he was barefoot all the time. He only ate vegetables. He was always calm and relaxed. He was, to me, a fucking mystery. Excuse my language, but he was an absolute mysterious person, because like, why doesn't he wear shoes when he goes outside? Why does he only eat vegetables? How come he's always calm in the face of stress? So he was like this curious guy. And when he passed away, it was really hard on me, even though I wasn't really close to him. He was such an inspiration or a mystery that I wanted to know him more. And at his memorial service, there was an opening for me at some point. There's these people on stage, everyone's chanting with sound meditation bowls, and they're singing Om. And for me at the time, not ever doing yoga, that was just weird. It was like they were whispering his name, Brian. I was like, this is just creepy. And I was barefoot for the memorial service, as everyone else was, in respect to Brian. And in feeling my feet on the earth and listening to these chants with the singing bowls, something just like clicked inside of me, and suddenly I looked up and I saw a bird in a distance, and it was completely vibrant. The colors were so bright, like I always refer to like an HD TV, just like, it was like the bird suddenly was a part of me in this big way. And I felt the breeze come by as if I just never felt it before. And suddenly I heard someone shift their weight to their right foot from their left foot. And I could hear the stick kind of crack underneath them, but they were all the way across on the other side of the audience over there. So it was like everything just woke up. And I suddenly knew at that point in time that there was more to life than what had been going on in my head, and that there was a force of energy that was running through all things. It was an awakening that was no longer trying to believe in something. It wasn't debating whether something else beyond me existed, but it was just a full knowing of like, wow, I am a being of nature and nature is all around me. And that moment shifted everything for me and started moving me in a new direction. So I started what I would call praying to Brian after this time for answers and guidance. And rather than making decisions, I would ask Brian to make the decisions for me. And so, I'm talking to dead people here. And Brian's making these decisions for me as I'm asking the questions. And every step of this way, things start becoming easier. And I decided to ask Brian one day to meet a girl, because I was like, well, I'm so lonely, and Brian's working out for me here, so can I get a girl? And in that desire to meet somebody, I asked Brian for it, and I was at the beach at the time and decided to go home and shower and come back at sunset. And when I came back, when I returned to the beach at sunset, there was just one person on the beach, and it was a girl. And living in a 1 square mile town when I wasn't on tour, usually so that was Seacliff, as you mentioned earlier. Usually every single person that lives in that town. So the fact that I didn't know this person there on this beach was pretty wild. And I'm not really good at talking to people if I don't have a reason to talk to them. I'm kind of a very shy guy, which most people are surprised by. But I walk past her, I go down to the water, then I walk past her again, making like these awkward loops around her with a huge.
Brian, what should I say?
Yeah, exactly. So I went down to the water and I look up at like the sun, and like I stepped my feet into the water, and the message to me came so clearly. It said, hey, you can ask for things in life, but unless you participate, nothing's going to happen. So that message like hit me so hard. I was like, wow, okay, that's right. I have to participate with life. I can't just expect life to do it for me. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what I was talking about earlier with like, you
dodging
still
the rocks.
Yeah, exactly. You're still putting effort, and it's not like you jump in the stream and you just expect to get down there okay without any effort on yourself. But this message was super clear. So I went over and stumbled upon some words that just meant nothing, and the girl looked up at me and she just says, hi. And I was like, oh, hi. And she asked me, she goes, so you're a musician? And I was like, how did you know that? And she's like, well, you have that rock necklace that is in the shape of a pick on your neck. And I was like, oh. And so this girl seems kind of mysterious, right? So she starts asking me all these kind of questions that were pretty pinpointed. And, here I am thinking like, wait, like this is meant to be, and of course, it's not exactly the story. It seems like, oh, this is going to be the love of my life, but it gets kind of interesting after here, because she goes, well, I just moved into the area. I was like, oh, where did you move? And she's like, into, blah, 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 blah. It happened to be my really close friend's house at the time. And I was like, what? So I get interested, and I'm not courageous enough to ask for her phone number, so I just figured I'll see her at some other time. And I
At your
run
friend's
into her
house.
another day. Yeah, at my friend's house. So I run into her another day at the friend's house, and I asked her to hang out sometime. She said, "Yeah, maybe." Um, so of course she's waiting again to till I basically am courageous enough to say, "Hey, can I have your number?" So the next time I run into her, I finally do ask, and she gives it to me. And it took another few weeks till we got together. But the point of this is, she was like, "Meet me here at this time and whatever." So I meet her on this dock on the water, and with no time wasted, the first question she says was, "Tell me something that you have never told anybody before." And I was like, "I just met you." And so I was like, well, I have a really close friend, my buddy Jesse, who I say everything to. So I'm like, what have I not told anybody before? So I tell her, I'm like, well, I've been talking to this dead guy, and he's been giving me guidance on my life that seems to be really helpful. And I know it sounds weird because, like, he's dead, and like maybe I'm talking to voices in my head, and maybe I'm crazy. And after I, kind of go through the whole thing with her of what's, how it came about, she goes, "Wow, that's amazing. How did you become so courageous and vulnerable?" And I asked her, I was like, "Wait, was that a good thing?" And she says, "It's an amazing thing." And she goes, I want you to read this book. And it was called Wisdom of the Peaceful Warrior. And she's like, "You have to promise me that you write in the side of the book and underline and highlight. And when you're done with it, then we'll get back together and you can give me the book." And I was like, "Okay." And she's like, "I got to go now." So of course I jump in my car, I drive straight to Barnes and Noble and search for hours for the book. Of course, it's in the New Age section that I've never been in before. So I finally find the book, and I'm thinking I'm going to read this in a day and hand it back to her so I can see her again. And within the first few pages, it says, "If you're struggling with meditation, try a moving meditation like Aikido, Tai Chi, or yoga." And I was like, well, my stepmom's a yoga teacher. Let me ask her. So I asked her for, I called her up actually right after reading that. And she said, "Yeah, come to class tomorrow. Here's my schedule." I remember writing down the schedule of her classes for during the week. And I showed up the next day, and she says, "You'll know after 3 times if this is a practice that you like." And that first Warrior 2, where I was looking over my middle finger, I fell in love instantly and was like, this is amazing. And after that practice, I knew something already had shifted in me. And I went back to the book like I was going to read the whole thing right away. But every time something came up in that book, I had to like sit, let it sink in, argue with it. I was writing like crazy. And it took me 3-4 months to read that book. So it was a while till I saw her again. And in that time, I had changed so rapidly because now I'm practicing yoga every single day. I'm reading this book. I'm eating healthy, and things had shifted. And I knew that there was a new path that was being laid out before me. I didn't necessarily know that it was going to shift away from music, but I knew that life was never going to be the same. And
That's so cool.
in that,
I mean,
yeah,
one thing that's coming out to me in all of this is like you've had all these different guides pop in that you didn't ask for that have kind of fed you down into the right direction. First, it was Brian, the barefooted music producer. Then it's this mystic, mysterious spirit guide girl from the beach. And then it turns out that you also have stepmom who's teaching yoga. And like, is it coincidence? Is it something else? Like you start to pick up on these patterns and get reaffirmed from that you're headed in the right direction.
yeah, that's a great observation because all three of these people, huge inspiration in my life. My stepmom became, I think for her it was really exciting to connect with me, and it was fun. And for me, fast forward to being a yoga teacher, having had somebody in the beginning to guide me and answer every single question that ever came up for me, and then spend time with me. That's why I think a huge reason why I'm in the position I am today of being a teacher's teacher and offering on a grand scale is because like, I just had an advantage that others didn't in a way. When you start yoga and you got to wait till you speak to your teacher the next day, I was like sitting with my stepmom, um, till midnight, just like doing warrior poses and asking her every question about this. So I was really fortunate, I will say, in the beginning to have somebody that was there for me every moment and every step of the way. And then yeah, I had this book as my guide, as my teacher, and I had this mysterious girl who was feeding my curiosity about life in a new way, who became actually, she's one of my closest friends still now. But her and I started meeting weekly to discuss our visions and our goals and who we wanted to be. And,
Sounds like a
and
powerful relationship.
yeah, yeah, super cool. Like, some people talk about having a soulmate that doesn't necessarily mean your soulmate is, your wife or your husband or something like this. And I would say that that's pretty accurate. I've got my wife, and she's my soulmate on many levels, of course. And I've also got my friends that I would say I have a few friends that are really my soulmate friends as well.
Mm-hmm.
That offer a deeper like connection into something more than the thoughts that I'm thinking and the feelings that I'm having in this body.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Hey, so you
yeah.
you told us a little bit about, an experience you had hitting a wall when you were following the path as a musician. But after you sort of course corrected and found your way into being a yoga teacher, like you said, it's not just sit down, put your floaties on, and ride the wave. There's course corrections that happen along the way and challenges that you face. So can you tell us a little bit about one that you've hit more recently, and whether that resistance was external or just something that you faced internally? What did you do to get through that?
Yeah, one. I mean, I would say the one that seems to come up um, at every turn is the fear uh, of the next step.
Oh yeah.
So it's happened many times in my career. Like for example, one of them, um, the fear of the next step was being uh, you know, I guess fast forward many years past the being broke musician, broke yoga teacher. I finally have a solid job in Manhattan. For the first time, I have health insurance, and I am regularly teaching on a schedule. Um, and I've got tons of classes, tons of private clients. I'm comfortable. I've got an apartment. Now this is like a total different lifestyle for me than I had lived most of my life. And the next step was to shake all that up. And so for me, I think the effort had to come in the form of courage to say, this is all amazing and it's gotten me this far, but I'm not going to get off this rock until I decide to swim away from it. And then, you know, and the rock is really comfortable, like
Yeah.
staying here, the water's rushing around me, I can breathe, and but I know that this rock is not the end.
Yeah. It's like it's the golden handcuffs. You don't want to settle for good when you could have something great that you can't even imagine yet.
Exactly. But there's some part of you that just knows that. It just knows that
Mm-hmm.
this is, and I'm also a mentor to many yoga teachers. I have a program that I talk to people weekly, and I hear this all the time. And it's hard to explain to somebody that, like, to just trust in life, that if you've got this feeling that and it's burning you inside, then it's telling you something and it's going to be okay. It's like it's really hard to get somebody to just believe in that because it's scary as can be. And for me, in that time of saying, like, okay, you've got all this safety, and you're not quite living your Dharma. You're not quite living, in alignment with the current. So I did make the step to purchase a house outside of the city in the country of Connecticut, and it was 2 hours away from Manhattan. And so the way I kind of kept one foot in and one foot out was like I took my classes down to 3 days a week. So I'd go into Manhattan, I'd teach those 3 days, and then I would have 4 days off in the country. And very quickly, I started to realize that my travel teaching began to pick up a little bit. And in that travel teaching, I was spending those 4 days that were supposed to be in Connecticut teaching elsewhere. So I wasn't actually getting any home time. And so I was coming home to the city, basically, and teaching there, and then leaving, and then teaching in Manhattan, and then leaving. And so then I have this really great home that I can't spend any time in. So I knew I had to make a switch. I had to make a change, make a jump. And that was for me to leave my steady, stable financial career in Manhattan and this community that I had built up and my reputation, and jump into teaching workshops around the world. No, well, I didn't think at the time around the world. I just thought I have to teach workshops. Mm-hmm. And this is hard because I just took on a mortgage. For the first time, now I have a responsibility to really pay something,
Yeah, the stakes are high.
Yeah, and I'm going to leave all things stable financially. And I, at the time, it wasn't like, workshops are flooding in, and I've got all these options to teach and make money. It was like, well, maybe they'll flood my way if I leave the city.
Yeah, if I open myself up to the opportunity.
Exactly. And I remember explaining to my dad the risk I was about to take, and my father's always been there, like to hear me out when I take these wild risks in life. And he's really good at like questioning whether or not, I'm making a decision based on something real, or if it's just my, passionate, imaginative mind. So he plays devil's advocate, which is always the worst thing in the world, but also the best thing.
Yeah.
So I know coming to my father with these kind of things, I've got to prepare myself. So I have to like kind of get clear on the vision. Otherwise, if I bring it to him with a blurry vision, then he's just going to like eat me alive. So I have to get really clear on what my vision is for how it could be successful. And so, that's a good thing for me because it actually points my ship in the right direction. Mm-hmm. And so I remember talking to him and getting clear, like, okay, if I open up my space and time, I can use that time to direct my career and to, focus on perhaps like social media and focus on other ways of getting myself out there. And, it was a big risk to just let go of my classes in Manhattan. I remember my boss at the time, she just said to me, she's like, Matt, like all the best traveling teachers that they all have a home base. They all teach regularly at a studio. She gave me like the example of Sean Korn and Shiva Ray, and she's like, they teach around the world, yeah, but they also have a home studio. And she's like, I really think that you need a home studio. I think that you need to have a safe, space where you come back to, and that's your regular, and you're not just jumping into the abyss. And I was like, I respect that, and I'm grateful for the guidance and the care, but it just doesn't feel right for me. Like Manhattan doesn't feel right. Teaching these classes just doesn't feel right. It actually never felt totally right to be teaching classes. I always feel so much more in my like rhythm and flow when I'm teaching workshops. Mm-hmm. And I'm grateful to have 7 years of practicing teaching classes, which are not my comfort zone and not my strength, because I really learned a lot from that. But now that I settled in teaching workshops, like, yeah, this is just natural for me. So it was courageous enough to just jump out of New York and just do it. And it was scary. And I was like, I've got a mortgage, and I've, who knows? I've got cars now. I've got to like live a life where I pay things, and it was a little rough for, I would say, 6 months. And then it started to look up, and I started to see that, wait, this could actually work. Um, and that was the last really big one. I would say
Well,
that I had.
yeah,
Yeah,
good for you for taking that enormous risk to a comfortable lifestyle that you had, worked so hard to make for yourself. And I think that's a kind of a perfect layup for one last story I'd love for you to share, which is, I don't want to spoil the surprise, but I know that you have a thriving social media presence, and you're doing it. You're going around, you're doing these workshop tours. Can you tell us one major win that's reaffirmed your conviction in that decision that you made for yourself, and your conviction in the impact that you're making in the world? So what happened, and what did you do to carry that success forward?
yeah, wow, okay. It's a good question. I think one of the major wins that's happening now for me is the development of chromatic yoga. I have this vision to create a global kind of community of teachers that are completely authentic and willing to do the transformative work of expanding who they are. Um, and so it's less of like creating a style of yoga, because chromatic means spectrum, and it's in terms of music and art, the
And light,
chromatic color
right?
wheel.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, it's less about having a bunch of yoga teachers that all believe in alignment oriented yoga or flow or whatever, and more about embracing the spectrum of the various styles of yoga and the various approaches and the various um, what is available to us as people, the spectrum of life. So we study the elements as our spectrum as well, and we relate them to who we are as a human, how we speak, our sequencing, our business, and blah 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 blah. But chromatic yoga was another big thing that was like, uh, for me, and it doesn't sound it, I guess, but it was a risk for me to take, to jump into something that was not just my career, and um, bring other people and their careers and their livelihoods and their life and their interests into a community, because so much more can happen and fail in community. It's like, if I mess up my own career, no big deal. I just self correct. But if I'm, with a huge group of people, I have a bigger responsibility on my hands to hold, a container, to hold true to an intention. It's a bigger accountability. And it's easy to just, like, for me to be like, well, my career is going well and I'm just going to stick with that. It's really hard for me to be like, okay, I'm going to bring all these different people together and see if we can create something powerful together. And so for me right now, my first chromatic training happened last summer, and I basically handpicked the people that I wanted to be a part of it. I called each of the people that I thought really would fit in well, and kind of be on board with the vision of having an open community of people that are not just one style. And each of them said yes, actually, which was amazing. And
That is
we had our
amazing.
first, yeah, we had our first training last year. And since that time, I've never been one to ask, like, people to support or help me. I'm kind of like the independent, like, I'll do it, that kind of guy.
Hmm.
I struggle with delegating stuff and so on. But this group has really been amazing, because not only do they allow for me to um, uh, kind of explore my own vision, because that's kind of how I set it up. Hey, I'm going to do this and explore my vision so that you can explore your vision, and all of us explore our own individual isms together as a group. So I feel really comfortable in the community that I can be myself, I don't have to be some sort of like head of, I'm not the guru at the top, but I'm just another one of the teachers in the community that has a vision, and everyone kind of finds a role for themselves that really fits the community's needs and also their strengths. So we have certain people running social media. We have people that are dreaming up ideas for the next rounds and so on and so forth. And everyone's kind of got a strength. This year, I'm doing Chromatic Level 1 and Level 2. And Chromatic Level 1 actually just sold out within a few days, which was quite amazing.
Congrats.
Thank you. Yeah. We're in the process of trying to find another housing unit so that maybe we can have a few more people come into the training. But that means Level 2 will probably be sold out too, simply because some of the people from Level 1 are doing Level 2, and last year's Level 1 teachers will be doing Level 2. And I have like a vision of everybody. One of the things about Chromatic Yoga is everybody's a student and everybody's a teacher. So at any given time, each of us step into the role of being student, and each of us step in the role of being teacher. And it's not like, if you have this skill, are always the teacher. It's just like you have this skill and you're the teacher in this moment when somebody wants to learn it. So
yeah, we're all going to share. And
yeah,
there's no one leader, but maybe you're the organizer and the facilitator of this community, the Sangha. I think that's a really cool, powerful concept that I haven't really heard much about. So good on you for creating that. And Matt, I'm not surprised, but I'm excited to see that you are continuing to find ways to further your mission and live your Dharma. So I think now is as good a time as any to move on to the prana round. And in this section of the interview, I'm going to ask you rapid fire questions. And I ask that you answer in one word or max one sentence. Does that sound good? You ready to go?
Sounds scary. Let's do it.
Okay. All right. In one word, why do you practice yoga?
To feel good.
That's not one word, but I'll take it.
Ah, man.
What's your favorite yoga pose and why?
What's my favorite what?
Yoga pose and why?
Handstand. And
you can have more than one word for that one.
It's continuously a mystery.
Yeah, true. Okay, what's the single best cue or piece of advice that you've ever received from a yoga teacher? Or a teacher in general? I think you actually, I think I read that you had a life-changing piece of advice from an art teacher.
Thank you. Instead of saying I can't, rephrase it to how.
I love that.
From my art teacher, Miss Walk. Yes.
I love that. Okay, actually you've recommended a number of books, but maybe you can just list them off again. Recommend a book, modern or ancient, for our audience.
Yeah, the books I have mentioned so far were Effortless Mastery for those musician yoga teachers or yogis, and Wisdom of the Peaceful Warrior is a really great guidebook based on the book Way of the Peaceful Warrior. And then lastly, I would say the book that I'm currently reading over and over and over again is called Mind Sight.
Cool.
By Daniel J. Siegel.
Okay. Is yoga for everyone?
Yes. Just depends on what the yoga is and the person.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Lastly, how can our audience get in touch with you, and how can we support you in your Dharma?
Okay. How the audience can get in touch with me, is that what you said?
Yeah.
theyogimat.com, 2 T's in my name, Matt, or theyogimat@gmail.com. All of those are great places to connect with me.
Same thing as Instagram and YouTube, right?
Yeah. Instagram, The Yogi Mat, YouTube, The Yogi Mat. So if you're a teacher or you're a serious student wanting to really learn, I would go to theyogimat.com or youtube.com/theyogimat. These are the places where I provide resources for teachers to learn and grow, also students to understand their practice more. I kind of use Instagram sort of as just a way in for those that really want to kind of connect with me. Instagram is mostly just a place to intrigue people. I don't necessarily, you're not going to get, you're not going to really get connected to me there. You'll get much more connected to me through my website, and through my YouTube videos. And I'm very open to responding to emails. So
that's
definitely.
Very generous of you. All right.
Yeah.
Matt, it's been such a pleasure to have you on. Thank you for sharing those vulnerable stories. I think our audience is going to get a lot out of it, and I know I did, so thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me, buddy. It's really nice to be with you.
If you got something out of this episode, if you like Dharma Talk and want to keep it going, please do me a huge favor and subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. I know it's not the most convenient thing to do, but it makes all the difference in getting this show out there and more visible to other people who can benefit from it. And hey, if you've got feedback or ideas or you want to get in touch with me, you can do that on Instagram @HenryWins. Otherwise, I'll talk to you next week. And until then, keep living your Dharma.